I'm Sanjay Parthasarathy, and I started at Microsoft in 1990, August 6, 1990. And I started as a product manager in multimedia systems, which eventually became part of Windows 3.1. And after doing that for a couple of years, I went off and became a group product manager in advanced consumer technology. Now, that was when we were trying to do interactive TV, and that technology ended up being part of Internet Explorer. So I became a product unit manager for commerce and security, I think, a product team in the IE group. And then a little bit after that, I went off to India to be regional director of the Indian or South Asian subsidiaries. And from there, I came back to work for Steve Ballmer as general manager of customer systems, did that for a couple of years, and then became corporate vice president for the platform strategy, developer and platform group, which owned the .NET platform. And after doing that for about 7 years, I went off and started a new division called Startup Business Accelerator. And that was my last role at Microsoft. I was born in Chennai, in India. I went to college there, engineering college in Chennai. Life was easy. I had a certain amount of privilege, and so I could do what I wanted. I played a lot of cricket. I used to play cricket in the professional league. I played for college, played for school. One of the dreams I had was to play for the country, but, academics got in the way sometimes. It was a long and winding road to ending up in the tech industry and figuring out what I wanted to do. I was a mechanical engineer, and and my engineering degree at MIT was also in mechanical engineering. But I realized that I still hadn't found what I really wanted to do. And so when I got to MIT Sloan, I did a research internship. I was an RA, as they used to call it, a research assistant for a project that was to test whether people would buy cars without ever talking to a salesperson. How I ended up at Microsoft was a long story. Every Thursday at Sloan, we used to have a beer party. It was called a consumption function. So I went up to the bar to get a beer, and I ran into two of the folks who had come down to interview my colleagues, and we got chatting. And they asked me what I was doing, and I told them about this project I was doing about selling cars on the online. And they said, "Can we see it?" So I took them up to my lab and showed them that, and they said, "Why didn't you apply to Microsoft?" And I said, "I did." You guys, probably didn't think I was, good enough. And anyway, so long story short, they had me fly out to Microsoft, and it was my first job. The two gentlemen at the bar that I met, I owe them a lot, and one was Richard Tate, and the other one was John Nielsen. So my first job at Microsoft was as a product manager. I think it was associate product manager in the multimedia division. It was the first time in multimedia systems. This was the time when computers didn't have audio and video at all, right? And there's a big push at Microsoft to get CD-ROMs into personal computers. And so there were three of us, Richard Bray, Hugh Chang, and myself, who were brought on board to try to get third parties, software developers, to write to multimedia systems to include audio and video into their program. So I had gaming companies and educational software companies as the target to go convinced to adopt Windows. And they were all on Microsoft MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, but writing to Windows was a big deal at that time. So I got to go to Lucasfilm and LucasArts and Entertainment, basically a lot of time in the Valley, Sierra Online, Microprose. These are all game software companies in those days. and try to convince them to move over to Windows. The pitch was like, please, please, you have to do this. Because I mean, in those days, the companies that were writing DOS games, MS-DOS games, got all the performance they wanted. In Windows, you had to go through a GDI graphical interface, and it was slower than they needed, and so on. So it took a lot of begging and pleading and relationship building. And, over time, they all moved, of course. It started to reach out to more normal people on the street. That was the thing that the graphical user interface did. It was really, truly a consumer launch. I remember, watching the launch. I think it was Jay Leno doing the launch with our folks, and it was the first time consumers went, "Oh yeah, I think I need that." Right. So that was the big shift with Windows 95. India was always on my mind. I grew up there. I'd always wanted to go back and do something there. In 1995, right after Windows 95 launched, I was looking for, okay, what else can I do to help? So I went to Orlando. I said, Orlando, I want to go to India. And he said, why? And, I said, because I think the market is ready for software, and I want to help. He said, we already got a GM in India. And I said, I know, but I want to go. And finally, in April of 1996, I landed in India. I mean, the reason South Asia was, and India in particular, was interesting is because I knew how much activity there was. It wasn't a big market. I mean, at that time, Microsoft may have been, a few $1 billion in revenue. And I think the OEM business in India at that time was somewhere in the $5 to $10 million range. Microsoft had a distributorship. It didn't have a subsidiary. So I think it was only in 1995 that they created a subsidiary. There were about 12 people, 12 employees in Microsoft in India. And so to me, it just felt like a combination of some place that I knew, some place that I had sensed that, things were happening. So the subsidiary was in New Delhi. And by the way, I was only there for 21 months, right? And the team grew from about 12 people, maybe it was around 12 to 20, some contractors. By the time I left to come back here, it was over 100 people. It just went crazy. And I think in that one and a little over, 1 year, 21 months, I think the revenue went, and again, don't quote me on this necessarily, but it went from about 10 million to about 40 million, give or take. So it grew quite rapidly. Convincing Bill to come to India was in large part Orlando Ayala's work. Bill was a technology rock star, and his visit to India just made him a pop star, if you know what I mean. He was just everywhere. It was the biggest thing in India that year, I think. So, I mean, he was bigger than Michael Jackson. He was there from March 7th to March 9th of 1996, 3 days. We ended up setting up about 45 meetings for those 3 days. We'd have meetings in parallel, right? We'd have one company, let's say it's TCS, in one room in Mumbai. He'd kick it off, spend 30 minutes with them, and another meeting would be going on, and he'd pop in there and do another 30 minutes. And so we did about 45 meetings. So just you can do the math. That was a lot of meetings there. Every major politician wanted to come listen to the future of technology, and meet with Bill Gates. So it was just crazy, chaotic. But in the end, I think we coined a term that actually caught people's imagination. India can be a software superpower, right? And at that time, if you think about it, 1997 was only 50 years, from independence. India was really looking for ways to make its mark in the world. And I think software superpower just caught people's imagination. And that was the beginning, I think, of India and software and technology. So, yeah, it's good to be there at the beginning. So our daughter was born in November of 1997. And I remember she was supposed to be born in December, but she came a month early. I happened to be in Sri Lanka at that time. And so, I missed her birth. And I was on the phone. She's always early on everything. My daughter is. But at that time, having had a first child, I did want to kind of come back and be part of that whole experience. And Steve was very, very helpful, very accommodating. He said, "I've got this new position, GM of customer systems." At that time, Microsoft.com was the largest site on the web. I think Netscape and Microsoft.com were 1 and 2 or 2 and 1. And he said, "Would you like to come do that?" And I said, "Yeah, makes sense. Let's do it." Running sales and marketing IT was probably my most challenging job at Microsoft. It was challenging because on one side you have Microsoft.com was running 100 miles an hour, and on the IT side, everybody was very, very, very methodical and careful, and it was slow by Microsoft standards, the way things were evolving. Obviously for good reason, but having done a lot of the kind of new technologies, rapid growth, rapid development, this was very challenging because you had to be very thoughtful and careful and slow and deliberate, and the most challenging job I've ever had. Bill and Steve and others wanted to create this new division that focused on taking all of our next-gen technology to market. And that was the beginning of my next job, which was called the Platform Strategy Group, and then became the .NET Platform Group, and then became Developer and Platform Group. So we started with 5 people, did an event called Forum 2000, where we launched .NET. And that group eventually grew to about 1,500 people and $1 billion in revenue. A lot of Microsoft's success comes from finding the right people who had the energy and the interest and the passion to do something that needed to get done, and giving people the freedom and the flexibility to do that. I still laugh at the whole India experience because there's no reason to get a completely untested person out in the field, right? Other than just saying, "Okay, let's take a risk. Let's take a risk on Sanjay." You already had a plan, and it was just the right place, right time. People think Microsoft was run top down. It was not. It was a functioning anarchy, right? Bill is given credit for being the big brain and thinking everything through, but he also knew very well that the best way to get stuff done was to get a lot of ideas bottom up. You could find 3 of everything, right? It was very, very bottom up with a lot of adult supervision, of course, right? Sometimes, but contrast it with Oracle or some of the companies that I've since experienced their style. Very top down, very regimented, very control driven, right? Very process driven, right? And this is the secret of Microsoft. It is not top down, it's bottom up. You don't get many places like that. this is my learning after almost 60 years of life and 30 years in this industry. Technology needs to go hand in hand with empathy. Technology by itself creates tech bros. We don't need more tech bros. Technology plus empathy is a meaningful mission. And I think it's going to get even more important because with new technologies like artificial intelligence, we have to have more empathy along with more technology. In India, one of the biggest issues around Microsoft when we went big was what would it do for jobs? How many people would it put out of work? And, having grown up in India, that was obvious to us, who are in the Microsoft subsidiary in India, that we had to balance a private business's objectives along with the country's needs. And when you had an issue like software piracy or legal software, you had to kind of consider both paths. And Microsoft in India would not have been successful if it was all about technology, and didn't include empathy. Having positive social impact is part and parcel of doing business the right way.